Hey guys, this is Comicpalooza Presents. I'm Erica Echlin with Gaming Podcast and Raging Nerd Podcast. And today our topic is building the Gameroom Schoolhouse, board gaming and home education. Hello, Miss Stephanie.
Hi, Erica. How are you?
I'm doing great. So today's discussion is building the Gameroom Schoolhouse, board gaming and home education. What made you think about starting this discussion today?
Well, so I homeschool my children. I have 3 children. We've been homeschooling since the beginning, since everybody had to homeschool, basically. And when I first started off homeschooling, I, did what I'm sure parents are doing now and what lots of people do. I went out and found all the best, curriculum and workbooks and everything, and started with my daughter, and, it went well at first. And then things kind of started to fall apart. She wasn't retaining. She wasn't understanding. We were just really struggling. But there was one thing that seemed to work. She was 5, and we would play Alphabet Go Fish by Peaceable Kingdom. And for some reason, whenever we did that, she could remember her letter sounds. It was a game. It was fun. It was exciting. And I started to realize that, there's something to this, to using games in homeschooling. And so going forward, that was about 3 years ago. So going forward, we've been using more games in our schooling. And I do it now with my middle daughter as well. I've done some research and realized that this is actually a thing. There's a large group of us out there of homeschool moms who use board games as a primary component in our homeschool.
So what is the basic definition of game schooling?
The basic definition of game schooling is just using games in your homeschool. Mm-hmm. And, for some, I know moms who don't do anything else. All they do is play board games with their kids, and they follow a very interest-led learning model. So they, follow the interests of their children, and they use games that their children are interested in. Then there are parents that use games only as a supplement, maybe to encourage their children or to inspire them to do more. For example, like a carrot, if you finish this, then, we can play a game. And that works really well for them. We kind of fall in the middle. I do use a curriculum, but I also use a lot of games to reinforce concepts. And this works really well, especially with children who might have difficulty in traditional learning settings. My oldest daughter, she has some learning difficulties. She has some health issues. And so traditional learning is difficult for her. And I find that gaming makes things so much more accessible than just, a textbook would. And I think there are a lot of parents that find that works really well for their kids as well.
So I can imagine definitely reading and math are big integral parts of board games and can definitely help children. But what about subjects like science or history? What kind of board games would you play to get into that aspect of learning?
That's a great question, and that's one that comes up a lot in the game school community. Fortunately, we are in, the golden age of board gaming right now, and there are board games on pretty much every subject. There are so many board games. You mentioned science. So there are several, especially I would say for older science. So there's a game called Balance, which is, I believe, it's a chemistry game, I want to say. My kids are still a little bit young, so we haven't gotten into it. But there are games that focus on chemistry. There are games that have the periodic table of elements as a main focus. So there's several games now that, this wouldn't maybe have even been an option for us when we were younger. Yes. But now, just because of the expansive games that there's a lot more. Now, also for history, there's a different route that you can go. There's, I mentioned that some people only use gaming, but then there are people who use gaming to reinforce concepts. And for history, you can use basically any topic and make it into a game. So game schooling is not just about using board games, although that's a huge component of it, but it can also be, making like a Jeopardy game out of, whatever you're studying. Your American history test, instead of being American history, you can make it into a Jeopardy game. There are also several really good games about history there is a game called Freedom, the Underground Railroad. It is basically a recreation of the Underground Railroad. And I believe that for the high school set, that would be an awesome way to really explore that topic. And there are several games that are similar.
Now, I'm sure you've heard this, and many people have asked you this. Are board games really educational?
That's my favorite question. So I'm of the opinion that any board game is educational. Any board game, even the worst board game. So even like Candyland, if you bless your heart, have to sit through that with a little one, is educational. And here are the reasons why. I think that there are things that you're learning that you don't even realize that you're learning when you play games. You're learning to take turns. You're learning resource management, right? How to move your piece on the board. Fine motor skills are being developed. Patience is being developed. You're learning how to win gracefully or how to lose graciously. And all those are really important socio-emotional things that children need to learn. I think that that's almost sometimes even more important than the educational, facts and material. But even beyond that, I think that games help children internalize the information in a way that just like a sheet wouldn't, worksheet or something like that. So if you think about a math game, or any game, this math is really the perfect example because it has so many applications in gaming, right? I mean, I dare you to come up with a game that doesn't use math in some way, even just to keep score. But, if you have a child who's really struggling with, say, addition, even just using that scorekeeping analogy, if you have a child that's really struggling with addition, put them in charge of scorekeeping. Now, all of a sudden, it's a little more important to them, right? They have ownership. It's not something that you want them to learn. It's something that they want to learn because there's a goal that's important to them. And I've found that can be really important for a child and really influential in helping them master concepts that are maybe sometimes difficult in other ways.
Yes. And I know you probably have heard this as well. How do you pick the right games? Like, it's when you go into a game store, I'm sure there's these aisles of board games that you can pick from. So how do you zone in and find the right one?
That is also a really good question. And, it's a challenge. I feel like one of the benefits, as we mentioned, of living in this golden age of gaming is that there are so many options. But also one of the drawbacks is that there are so many options. I think just some basic tips, and I think gamers, I feel like game schooling, you can come at it from two ways, from two directions. So there's the gamers who are like, oh, this is really great. I want to, introduce my children to board gaming and I want to get them involved. And if we can learn something from it, all the better, that's great. And then you have people who are coming at it, from the education perspective where they're, educators first and they want to use games in their schooling. And I feel like the gamers kind of have a little bit of an edge, game concepts that you would use when you're choosing games for yourself are probably going to be similar concepts that you use when choosing games for your children. You can kind of tell the ones that are put out to make money and versus the ones that are quality and built to last. I would look for the kind of choices that you make. If it's just a roll and move, your applications are going to be limited, and how much you can get, how much traction you can get as far as how well you can use the game, and also for how many different things you can use a game. That's something that I really love about board gaming, is that you can often use one game in many different ways. Also, something that you would look for in your own games, like quality components and is it well made? Especially with children, are the pieces going to break? That's a huge one. Yes. That I would look for. Now, if you're looking for specific resources to find what games are going to work best, there are several places that you can look online. There is a woman by the name of Kate Curley, and she has done quite a bit of work. She's kind of the pioneer in the game schooling world. And she has a blog called My Little Poppies. And on that blog, she has tons and tons and tons of recommendations. So I always recommend that anybody who's looking into game schooling start there. I have also launched a blog called Gameroom Schoolhouse. We're adding content, and my goal there is also to point parents really to the quality games, not the quantity, but really, here are 5 games that you can pick up and start game schooling today, and that kind of really specific content.
And that does lead into my next question. Where can parents go to look for a large variety of games? Do you recommend them going to a comic book store, going online? I mean, there's conventions like Gen Con where they talk about all these different kinds of board games. So where would someone go to look at a large variety of board games?
I think most game schoolers get their games on Amazon like everyone else. The thing about games for children is that you generally have to be a little more specific in what you're looking for. I definitely believe that a parent can walk into a game store or a comic book store that has games and walk out with 3 or 4 really good options. I would not recommend that a parent do that without having a couple of ideas of what they're looking for first. So I would definitely say do your research online first. I would also look on Facebook. There are several game schooling groups, and there are groups where parents who use games in their education just kind of come together and talk about, this is a game that worked for us. This game is on sale right now. Those are really big posts. Once you have a general idea of what it is that you're looking for, like a basic list of recommendations, then it's easier to find. I would also mention, this can be a little cost prohibitive for some people. Gaming is not necessarily a cheap hobby. And parents who are homeschooling often don't have, an inexhaustible budget. So one thing that can be really useful is looking at thrift shops. I've found so many great games, especially for children. They're often really good games for children that you can find at thrift shops. Also, too, don't despise your package of dominoes and your deck of cards, your dice. Those are really, really powerful educational tools, and you can get really good deals at thrift shops for those as well.
Now, we've talked about purchasing board games, but what about making your own board games? How would you go about that?
Yes, there's a large group of people who like to get together to share, maybe not board games specifically that they've made, but ideas on how to make games for their children, and how to, especially things like math or reading or spelling. They're sharing ideas on ways to implement that. I would say a real basic way, kind of like I mentioned before, for like the Jeopardy concept. That's a great way to use a game to communicate information. Another one would be bingo. You can make bingo out of anything. And I found so many times that if we play, addition bingo versus a worksheet, I mean, think about what would be more appealing to you. It would a game board or a worksheet. What does that inspire in you? And think about, your child. And I didn't mention this before, but I want to mention one reason that games are so effective is that there's no red pen, right? They're not judging you. There's a winner and a loser generally, unless you're playing a cooperative game, but it's a little bit different. The onus is shifted from the parent, I'm the parent, I'm the teacher, you're the child, to we're both players together. There's an equal chance that we could both win or lose. So it evens the playing field quite a bit, gives children a little bit more agency than they would necessarily feel in a homeschooling setting. And I feel like that's really important to mention, especially since there might be parents who find themselves kind of suddenly homeschooling in a way that they would not have before. And I feel like that's something that a lot of parents struggle with in the beginning. I hear a lot of, my child can't learn from me. They can learn from their teacher, but they can't learn from me. And a lot of it is that power struggle of their child, feeling maybe overwhelmed or feeling like they want to perform well for their parent and they're unable to, so they get overwhelmed. Sometimes that comes out in behavior. If we can push the book aside, and you don't have to throw the book out, just push it aside, make it a bingo game instead. Write down a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper on a grid, and then write down a bunch of problems on another piece of paper, tear them up, and then you pull them out. Okay, 2 + 6 is 8. All right, do you have 8 on your bingo card? All right, you do. And then you put the piece down. Really simple, right? It took you about 5 minutes to put it together, but it totally changes the dynamic.
How have you dealt with having children, or have you heard of people having children with learning disabilities, learning difficulties? How do you keep them entertained, and how do you monitor the situation so that they don't have outbursts?
Games are actually amazing for helping children with these kinds of issues. One is the reason that I mentioned before, just that the power shift and giving children a little more agency, giving them a little more control. I would say don't be afraid to put it away. If there's a game that you're playing and it's not working, we're too upset, we can't function, I think everybody would agree that it's better to walk away. If you're in a place that you can leave it set up even, we're going to walk away, we're going to take a break, and then come back. I think that can be effective on a couple levels. One, you're telling the child it's okay to take breaks. If you're feeling overwhelmed, it's okay to stop. But also, too, we're not going to give up on it. We're not going to stop just because we're having a hard time. We're going to keep going, and that helps develop that growth mindset. I think something also that's important for parents to remember when you're playing a game with your child, if it's something, especially that's maybe more academic focused, where they're doing math or they're reading, especially if it's a subject that's difficult for them. If they start to say, I can't math, I can't do this, I'm not good at math, I'm not good at reading, to take a break and say, hey, is it that you're not good at it, or is it that you haven't practiced? Or is it that you can't play this game, that you're not good at this game, or you just haven't had that much practice with this game? Let's keep practicing and we can get better. And notice your own language, the way that you talk about yourself, the way that, do you say, oh, I'm no good at this? Or do you say, man, really need to work on that? That has a huge impact on children, especially children that maybe do have learning difficulties or that have special needs, because they tend to internalize that, especially when it's maybe not diagnosed or not, really come to the forefront yet. It's really easy for the child to make I'm just no good at whatever it is, instead of, no, I have this thing that needs to be handled. And then if you have a specific learning disability, there are so many resources out there for parents where they can, there are Facebook groups and blogs and all kinds of things that really can help children with those things. I would say another way that games can be helpful is there's a game, especially I would say with younger children, but my older child has also enjoyed this, called the Yoga Garden game. And it's basically it's like yoga in a game, and you spin the spinner and it has you do a pose, and it kind of gamifies yoga a little bit, but it makes it fun and engaging for children, but it also helps bring that mindfulness back. That's a really good one to pull out when nothing is working, pieces are flying across the room, because I've had that happen too. I'm not going to lie. We've had tables flipped. We've had pieces fly. It's not all, it's not all been wonderful and peaceful in our home. We've had to work through some of that. But I found that one, taking a break, or two, bringing out something like that helps us all be a little more mindful and calm is helpful.
And Mike, last question for you. How do you fit in time to play board games with your children? Some households, they only have one parent where they have multiple jobs, and even households where you have both parents and they have full-time jobs. How do you make time for that?
That's huge, right? That's huge. That's been a challenge for us. And it surprises me that it's a challenge for me, because this is what I do, right? This is my life. But, there'll be a month where I'll realize, man, we have not played a game all month because I've been focused on other things. So there's a couple things that we do. Multiple children sometimes make it a little bit more of a challenge. But one thing that I do is when it's time for learning, maybe, and I realize, we homeschool completely. So I'm not beholden to the state. I don't have to do, there's no online distance learning. For people that have that, it's a little more, they don't have the same amount of flexibility.
Mhm.
We homeschool 5 days a week, but I only schedule content for 4 days. That 5th day I leave open so that we can either one, catch up, or we can play a game. And I write it in my planner. That's another tip that I would have is write it down. I would say if it, write it somewhere as part of your family schedule. Friday night is game night, and if you only play games with your child once a week, you're still making a huge impact. I would say something else that I've started doing with my middle daughter is once, the baby's in bed and then my older daughter is off doing whatever she's doing, we have tea time at night, right before her bedtime. And it's just 15, 20 minutes. We make tea, we talk about our day, and we bring out a simple game. I found that like abstract games or card games work well for this. Something that's short and simple, funny games work well too, because, there's no stress. It's something that you can giggle about. Strategy games are really good for this because you're still getting a little bit of that critical thinking, that logic kind of development. So you're still sneaking the learning in, but it's fun and you're bonding and you're connecting. I think people overlook the role of connection in education. Something I learned early on is that if my child does not trust me, they cannot learn from me. If my child perceives me as a threat, if they think that I'm just trying to make them learn something, then it's not going to happen no matter how hard I try. So a huge part of education is just developing that connection. And think back to apprenticeships, and this is a concept that is not new. This understanding that you need to have a relationship with someone to learn well from them. So I would say that's one of the biggest roles that board gaming can play, is to build that relationship with your child. So I would say maybe before bed, over the breakfast table is another good one. Before everybody rushes off to their computers, if you're doing distance learning. And again, a short, quick game is a good one. If you want to play a longer game, games that can be stopped and just left set up, like if you don't have a young child or a crazy animal that's going to mess it up, maybe setting up a longer game at the table. And, whenever you have lunch or dinner breaks, everybody comes in, you play a couple rounds, and then, if you need to go do your things, that's fine. You go do your things and you come back. I would never really in my right mind recommend Monopoly, but Monopoly would be one that would be good like that. But games like that are kind of turn-based, that don't have any kind of speed element, that can be left and come back to.
Well, thank you so much for today, Ms. Stephanie. Where can we find you and your projects?
So I'm on Instagram at Gameroom Schoolhouse. And I'm also, like I mentioned, just started my blog, gameroomschoolhouse.com.
Great. Well, thank you guys. Again, I'm Eric Echlin from Gaming Germ Podcast and Raging Nerds Podcast. Continue the conversation in the comments, like, share, and ring that bell. Thank you for tuning in to Comicpalooza Presents.